someone you loved is gone. Not gone like they left the camp. Not gone like they wandered off to find water and haven't come back yet. Gone in the way that your body understands before your mind. Does a stillness in them that has no explanation. A weight that wasn't there before. A face that looks like the person but isn't not anymore. You don't have a word for this. You don't have a word for much of anything yet. What you have is the feeling enormous, shapeless, pressing down on your chest like a stone, and the question that comes with it, the one your species will spend the next 3,000,000 years trying to answer. What do you do with them now? For most of human history, that question didn't have an obvious answer. Other animals don't bury their dead. Wolves don't. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, will sometimes carry a dead infant for days. Researchers have documented this in multiple populations, including work by Dora Biro at Oxford. But they don't enter them, don't mark the spot, don't return. The body is held, and then eventually it isn't. And that is all. But somewhere in the deep past, something shifted. Humans started putting their dead in the ground. And the moment they did, they crossed a line that no other creature on Earth had ever crossed before. The question isn't just when it happened, it's why, and what it tells us about the minds that made that choice. Let's start with the evidence, because the evidence is stranger and older than most people realize. The oldest claimed burial sites are genuinely controversial. This is an area where paleoanthropologists actively disagree, and you should know that going in. But some of the most compelling early evidence comes from a site in South Africa called Rising Star Cave, part of the Cradle of Humankind, UNESCO World Heritage Site outside Johannesburg. In 2013 and 2015, a team led by Lee Berger at the University of the Witwatersrand recovered more than 1,500 fossilized bone fragments belonging to a previously unknown species, Homo naledi. The bones were deep inside a near-inaccessible cave chamber, accessible only through a passage so narrow that the researchers had to recruit unusually small scientists specifically to retrieve them. What were they doing there? This is where it gets contested. Berger's team argued in papers published in eLife in 2015, and again in 2023, that Homo naledi deliberately deposited its dead in that chamber. Not as a result of a cave-in, not because predators dragged them there, but intentionally. If true, this would push deliberate mortuary behavior back to somewhere between 236,000 and 335,000 years ago. And here is the part that makes paleoanthropologists genuinely uncomfortable. Homo naledi had a brain roughly a third the size of yours. Smaller than Homo sapiens. Smaller even than Neanderthals. A species with that brain volume doing something that most researchers assumed required considerable cognitive sophistication. The ability to conceptualize death, to feel something like grief, to decide that the body of a community member deserved more than simply being left where it fell. Not everyone accepts this interpretation. Some researchers argue the bones could have accumulated through other means, ancient flooding scavengers, geological processes we haven't fully accounted for. The debate is real and ongoing. But the fact that the debate is happening at all says something important. We keep finding evidence of mortuary behavior earlier and in stranger places than we expected. The cleaner evidence, the kind with broader consensus, comes from the Middle Paleolithic, roughly 1,200,000 to 4,000 years ago, from Neanderthal sites scattered across Europe and the Middle East. At Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, excavated by Ralph Selecki in the 1950s and 60s, researchers found the remains of at least 10 Neanderthal individuals in what appeared to be intentional burials. One of them, the individual catalogued as Shanidar 4, was surrounded by clusters of pollen. Selecki interpreted this as evidence that flowers had been placed with the body, and for decades, this was cited as proof that Neanderthals grieved, that they mourned, that they had something like ceremony. This is the part where intellectual honesty requires a pause. Later analysis complicated the flower story considerably. Researcher Jeff Leitner and others pointed out that the pollen clusters could easily have been introduced by burrowing rodents, a species of gerbil-like animal that nests in the cave and is known to stockpile flowering plants. The romantic image of a Neanderthal funeral, surrounded by wildflowers, may or may not reflect reality. Science corrects itself, and that correction matters. But, and this is important, stripping away the flowers doesn't strip away the burial. The bodies at Shanidar were still placed in pits, still in positions that suggest deliberate arrangement. The flower question is genuinely open. The intentionality of the interment is harder to dismiss. More recently, work at sites like Kabara Cave in Israel, analyzed in part by researchers, including Baruch Arnsberg, has confirmed Neanderthal burials with greater rigor, including a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton with hyoid bone intact. The small horseshoe-shaped bone at the base of the tongue that is associated with the capacity for speech. Its presence in that condition tells us the body was deliberately placed and left undisturbed. It wasn't scavenged. It wasn't scattered. Someone put it there and left it. So here is what we actually know by at least 1,000,000 years ago, possibly significantly earlier human and human-adjacent species were doing something with their dead that no other animal does. They were returning them to the earth, and they were in at least some cases doing it, with what looks like care. Now ask the harder question. Why? The obvious answer, the one that feels instinctively right, is that burial is about grief, about love, about the feeling that a person who mattered should not simply be left to rot in the open, exposed, reduced to nothing by weather and scavengers. That answer is probably partly true, but it's almost certainly not the whole story. Think about what a dead body actually represents to a small group of people living in the open without refrigeration, without antibiotics, without any of the things that let modern humans manage the aftermath of death from a comfortable sanitary distance. A body is a smell, a very specific smell that your nervous system is wired to notice, to recoil from, to associate with danger. Because for most of human evolution, that smell meant disease, meant predators, meant risk. You don't need language to understand that a decomposing body near your camp is a problem. Burial solves that problem. Practically, efficiently, immediately. You put the body in the ground, you cover it, the smell diminishes, the predators stop circling. This may sound reductive, and I want to be careful here, because I don't think practicality and grief are mutually exclusive, not then and not now, but understanding the functional logic of burial matters. It tells us something about when the behavior could have emerged and why it might have been retained, even among groups that hadn't yet developed the cognitive or linguistic complexity we usually associate with ritual. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because burial doesn't just solve the practical problem, burial creates something new. When you put a body in the ground and mark the spot, even with something as simple as a stone or a particular arrangement of bones, or a depression in the earth that you remember and return to you, have created a place that means something, a place that is different from all the other places around it, a place where the person was and where something of them remains. This is, as far as we know, a uniquely human act, and what it implies about the minds that performed it is extraordinary. To mark a grave and return to it, you need something that most animals don't appear to have in the same form, a relationship to the dead that extends past the moment of death. You need to be able to hold in your mind the concept that this person existed, that their existence mattered, and that the place where their body lies carries some continuing significance. You need, in other words, something very close to what we would call memory, that is not just personal, but shared, a social memory, a communal record held not just in one brain, but across a group. Anthropologist Paul Pettit at Durham University, who has written extensively on Paleolithic mortuary behavior, argues that the emergence of burial marks a crucial cognitive threshold, not the emergence of consciousness itself, but the externalization of a relationship between the living and the dead. The grave is a technology, not a stone tool, not a fire, something subtler. A technology for managing loss. And once you have that technology, something else becomes possible, because the grave is also a claim. A territorial marker, though not in the way we usually use that phrase. To bury your dead in a place is to say, we were here, our people were here. This ground holds something of ours. Researchers, including Chris Stringer at the Natural History Museum in London, have suggested that mortuary behavior may be linked to the development of more complex group identities, the beginning of something like us versus them, the cognitive infrastructure for in-group loyalty, and eventually for culture itself. Think about what that means. The first cemeteries, if we can call them, that may not have been primarily about honoring the dead. They may have been about defining the living, about saying, this is who we are, this is where we come from, this is the ground that belongs to our line. This connects to something that shows up consistently in the archaeological record once burial becomes more common, the inclusion of objects with the body. Red ochre, an iron oxide pigment that produces a vivid red color and appears at burial sites across Africa, Europe, and the Middle East going back at least 1,000,000 years, possibly much longer, with evidence from sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa. Shell ornaments, stone tools, food remains, things that the person used or owned or valued. Why put objects in a grave? There are several possible answers, and the archaeological record can't definitively choose between them. One is purely practical. The objects belonged to the dead person and no one else wanted them or touching them felt wrong. Or they needed to go with the body for reasons that felt urgent even if we can no longer fully articulate them. Another is more cognitively complex. The objects were placed there because the people doing the burying believed on some level that the dead person would need them, would use them, would continue in some form somewhere. This second possibility, the germ of what we might call an afterlife concept, is the one that makes researchers genuinely pause. Because if it's true, then burial isn't just a management strategy for the dead. It's evidence of something remarkable happening in the human mind. The first sustained engagement with the idea that death might not be the end. You don't need theology for this. You don't need language necessarily. You need only the experience of dreaming about someone who is gone, which humans almost certainly did, and the inability to fully extinguish the sense that the person still exists somewhere, just beyond your reach. Dreams are vivid. Dreams are real, in the moment of their happening. And for a mind that doesn't yet have a clear framework for distinguishing the experience of dreaming from the experience of waking a dream about the dead, could feel very much like a visitation. James McLennan, a sociologist at Elizabeth City State University, who has written on the evolutionary origins of religion, has argued that the hallucinatory vividness of certain altered states of consciousness, including dreams, illness-related delirium, and possibly trance states may have been a key driver of early beliefs about souls and afterlife. You don't have to accept the full argument to see the logic. If you keep experiencing the dead as present, you may come to treat them as present. And if you treat them as present, you need somewhere to put them. À place, à grave. Here's the thing that gets me every time I think about this. The gap between the oldest possible evidence of deliberate burial and the present day is somewhere between 3,000,000 and 4,000,000 years, depending on how you read the rising star evidence. That is an almost incomprehensible span of time, and across that entire span in every corner of the world, where humans have lived and left any trace, the practice persists. Not identically, the forms vary enormously from simple interment to elaborate tomb construction, to cremation, to sky burial, to mummification. But the core impulse remains. We do not simply leave our dead. We do something with them. We mark the moment. We return them somewhere. No other animal does this with anything close to this consistency, this complexity, or this apparent intentionality. Now let's reconstruct the scene. Not a grand ceremony, something smaller. Somewhere in what is now Europe, roughly 7,000 years ago, a group of Neanderthals, 20, maybe 30 individuals bound by kinship and shared territory, has lost someone. An adult probably, though. We won't speculate on gender or specific role, because the record doesn't let us know. What the record does suggest from sites like La Ferracie in France, where multiple Neanderthal burials have been found in close proximity, is that some groups return to the same locations to bury their dead across generations. This was not random. This was repeated. This was chosen. The body is placed in a shallow pit. The arms may be arranged at Chanadar at La Chapelle aux Saints. The positioning is deliberate enough to suggest intentionality, even to skeptical analysts. The earth goes back over. The group remains nearby, at least for a time. There is no speech as we know it. We don't know the full extent of Neanderthal communication. The hyoid bone from Kibara suggests they may have had more vocal capacity than we once assumed, but the nature and complexity of that communication is genuinely unclear. What there is almost certainly is sound, something that functions like mourning. Because the social bonds in groups like this were real kin selection, reciprocal altruism, the deep familiarity of people who have lived in close proximity and survived together, and the severing of those bonds produces something in the nervous system that doesn't require language to express. Someone covers the pit. The group moves on eventually, but the place stays. The place is the thing that stays. Now bring it forward. Not to the ancient world of 5000 years ago to last year or last week, or the last time someone you knew died, and you found yourself standing somewhere that felt like it held something of them. A graveyard. A childhood home. The spot by the water where you used to go together. The feeling that the dead are not entirely absent from places that mattered to them. That feeling is very old. Older than cities, older than writing, older than agriculture, possibly older than our own species in its current form. It was in the Neanderthal putting a body in the ground at La Ferraci. It was in the Homo naledi if Berger's team is right navigating the dark of Rising Star Cave with someone they could not save. We didn't invent grief. We inherited it. From something older than us, something smaller-brained than us, something that looked at the stillness in a person they'd known and decided without words, without theology, without anything we would recognize as philosophy, that this stillness deserved a response. And so they did what we still do. They dug a hole. They put someone in it. They covered it back up. And they walked away carrying something they would never fully put down. You still carry it too. That's not metaphor. That's the unbroken line from a cave in South Africa to wherever you are right now of a species that never learned how to simply leave.